Get lumped up tonight. Listen to Rob Rossi and Rock a Mike on the only podcast that I'll hear that won't make me wanna rip off my ears. Oh, the Rock Show, the Rock Show, the Rock Show, the Rock Show, the Rock Show. The Rock Show, oh, I want the Rock Show. The Rock Show, 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 the Rock Show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the new episode of The Rock Show. This is episode 203. I'm Rocker Mike. How you doing, Rob?
Pretty good today, man.
Okay, cool. A little early show today. Having a little coffee, a little breakfast show. Today, we have a special show about the singer Nico. Nico's probably most famous for her 3 songs that she did on the first Velvet Underground album with them. She was considered kind of a chanteuse, what's referred to as a chanteuse for the Velvet Underground. But she has a very interesting career that started off with some films. She got into music and then had a long solo career of very interesting avant-garde kind of stuff. It's also a sad story. She died young also. She had a serious heroin addiction for many years that definitely affected her career and her life. And basically, she's kind of known for that too, for the drug abuse, unfortunately. But you know who she is, right, Rob? You've seen her before.
I've seen her before, but I really didn't know much about her until we started doing the show.
Yeah, I mean, she is on the first Velvet Underground album. It's called The Velvet Underground with Nico and Nico.
Yeah, because Warhol wanted her, right? Andy Warhol wanted her.
Right. She fell in with the Warhol crowd. I'll get into the whole history of it. But she started off, she's a German citizen. She was born October 16th, 1938 in Cologne, Germany. So she was born a little bit before the war started. Her parents were named Wilhelm and Marguerite. The last name is Päffgen. Her last name was Päffgen. Wilhelm was a wealthy man, okay, and was from kind of like a beer background, brewery background in that city of Cologne. He was Catholic. Most people in that region are, but her mother came from a lower class background, her mother Marguerite, and she was actually Protestant. So when Nico was 2, she moved with her mother and grandfather to what's called the Spreewald Forest. It's right outside of Berlin. Cologne at the time was getting bombed day and night by the Allies, and it was basically to escape that. Her father was serving in the I believe the Wehrmacht at that time. Now, there's several conflicting accounts as to how he died.
Uh-oh.
Okay? Now, according to a biographer named Richard Witz, in his 1995 book called Nico, The Life and Lies of an Icon, which I've read, it's a very good book. He was actually, he was wounded in 1942 after being shot in the head by a French sniper.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Now, with no certainty that he would survive, his commanding officer, following standing orders, ended Päffgen's life by a gunshot, put him out of his misery. Okay, that's one story. Another story is that he sustained head injuries that caused severe brain damage and spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric institution. According to unproven rumors, he was variously said to have died in a concentration camp or to have faded away as a result of shell shock. So no one really knows what happened. I don't think it was something that Christina, not yet known as Nico, would talk about too much. You know, sad story.
Was he a German fighter?
Yeah, he fought for the German army, the Wehrmacht. He was a German. He was from Cologne, Germany. And he was drafted. No, well, it says he was drafted. A lot of people in the Wehrmacht were not Nazis. People in the SS were. Okay?
Yeah.
But not in the Wehrmacht. That was just the regular grunts in the army. They didn't give a shit. I mean, I'm sure that there were plenty of officers that were Nazis, but regular guys, no. So after the war in 1946, Nico and her mother relocated to downtown Berlin, where her mother worked as a seamstress. Nico attended school until the age of 13 and began selling lingerie in the exclusive department store called KaDeWe. Eventually, she would become a model. She was a beautiful girl.
She was a good-looking woman.
Beautiful, statuesque features. Yeah, I mean, you know, full lips, statuesque features, straight hair, very pretty, beautiful figure, very stunning looking, the kind of person that would be a model, and very good with the fashion sense in time too. She would be known for that. She was also 5'10", which is pretty tall for a girl. Nico rose to prominence as a fashion model while she was a teenager. So at that age, she was becoming known. At the age of 15, while working as a temp for the U.S. Air Force, she was allegedly raped by an American sergeant.
Oh,
and she gave evidence at the trial, which led to the perpetrator being court-martialed. Okay. So, I mean, you got to think of the time. You know, Berlin was partitioned off into different areas. America had a section. Britain had a section. The Russians had a section. I believe the French had a section. Okay. So the incident was actually, the rape was actually referenced in her song called Secret Side that she would record many years later. However, biographers such as Richard Witts have debated the validity of the story, as no public records of the case have been documented. You know, of course, you're dealing with post-war stuff. Who knows? You know, records could be lost.
Yeah, that shit could be misplaced. You know,
exactly. I mean, if you could picture Berlin after World War II was just rubble. Basically, it was partitioned off, but everything had to be rebuilt. So I'm sure records could get lost easily. Nico was discovered at the age of 16 by photographer Herbert Tobias while both working at a KaDeWe fashion show in Berlin. He gave her the name Nico. That's how she got the name. After a man he had fallen in love with. Okay, he was obviously gay. Okay. Yeah. He was in love with a guy named Nico and decided to give her his name. That was actually filmmaker Nikos Papatakis. And she used that name for the rest of her life. She moved to Paris shortly after and began working for Vogue, Tempo, Vie Neuve, Mascotte, Spettacolo, Camera, and Elle magazines.
That's a lot of magazines.
Give my pronunciations on some of those. Around this time, she dyed her brown hair blonde, later claiming she was inspired to do so by Ernest Hemingway. At age 17, she was contracted by the Coco Chanel to promote their products, but she ended up fleeing to New York City and abandoned that job. Through her travels, she learned to speak English, Spanish, and French.
Wow.
Very well-to-do lady.
That's a lot of language, and none of them are easy, you know?
European people all can do that.
German, and it's crazy.
Yep. Now, in 1959, when she was 21, she had an uncredited speaking part in Mario Lanza's last film called For the First Time. In the same year, she was invited to the set of Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita, where she attracted the attention of the acclaimed director. He gave her a minor role in the film, playing herself, By that time, she was living in New York and taking acting classes with Lee Strasberg. She was in the Lee Strasberg school. La Dolce Vita is a great film. I think it's probably my favorite Fellini movie. He's got a few I like, but her part is just kind of like she plays a character named Nico. It's kind of her, and she's like very whimsical and playful, dancing around and stuff like that. It's a strange film, but you see her in this movie, and you're just like, oh my God, this girl is gorgeous. You know, it's the kind. You know, you might meet women like that in your life. Like everybody just falls in love with them as soon as they see them. You know? Those are usually trouble, women like that.
Bad trouble, bad.
Yeah. So she had a role in the 1961 Jean-Paul Belmondo film called A Man Named Rocca. She appeared as the cover model on jazz pianist Bill Evans' 1962 album Moonbeams. She was on the cover of that album. After splitting her time between New York and Paris, she got the lead role in Jacques Portrenard's Striptease in 1963. She recorded the title track, which was written by Serge Gainsbourg, but not released until 2001, when it was included in the compilation Le Cinéma de Serge Gainsbourg. Excuse my French here. Now, in New York, when she was living there, where she was living, I should say, Nico first met Greek filmmaker Nico Papatakis, whose name she adopted. The two actually lived together between 1959 and 1961. After noticing her singing around the apartment, Papatakis asked her if she had ever considered a career in music. And basically, in 1965, Nico would meet Rolling Stones guitarist Brian Jones, and he helped her get recording the single "I'm Not Saying," okay, which was actually, I believe, a Gordon Lightfoot song, okay, and it was for the Immediate label. We've talked about Immediate many times.
Yeah, that's a big label.
Right. The B-side was a song called "The Last Mile." And both tracks were produced by Jimmy Page, who was basically one of the session hands at Immediate and was very good at it. Actor Ben Carruthers introduced her to Bob Dylan in Paris that summer. That Ben Carruthers is an interesting guy, too. He was in the film Shadows by John Cassavetes. You ever see that movie?
No. Any good?
Yeah, it's excellent. I think it came out about 1959. Cassavetes is an interesting dude. Probably one of the first real kind of like independent filmmakers. And Ben Carruthers plays. It's the first film really to discuss like interracial relationships and people that are like mulatto, half black, half white. Okay, and Ben Carruthers plays a guy. And Ben in the I always felt that Lou Reed kind of was watching this film and took Ben Carruthers' look a little bit. He has like a very similar hair, black wraparound glasses like you see on the Velvet Underground cover.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like that look. Ben looked like that about 8 years earlier. You know, I always thought that Lou Reed aped that look a little bit. Anyway, he was also in The Dirty Dozen, Ben Carruthers. He has a small part in that. He introduced her to Bob Dylan in Paris of that summer of 65. And in 67, Nico recorded his song, Dylan's song, I'll Keep It With Mine, for her first album, Chelsea Girl, which is an album that everybody should listen to. It's a beautiful album. It's not for everybody because Nico's voice, and we'll go into it a little bit, is not for everybody. She has a very deep, booming voice for a girl. Okay, yeah. You know, deep voice with a German accent. And it's just, you know, it's just not for everybody. No. But I think it's a beautiful voice. So anyway, after being introduced to Brian Jones, she began working in New York with Andy Warhol and also Paul Morrissey, who was part of Andy Warhol's circle. She was in some experimental films for Warhol, including the movie Chelsea Girls, a movie called The Closet, Sunset, and also a movie called Imitation of Christ. Warhol began managing the Velvet Underground. I wouldn't really call it managing. He just kind of tacked his name to the band.
Pretty much what he did.
Yeah, he didn't know anything about music production, anything like that. But having his name attached to the band gave the band a lot of attention. He saw them playing at the Cafe Wa. Nico was not part of them yet. Okay, they would be introduced. But
you know what's funny? The guy that books the band now in Cafe Wa is a good friend of mine.
No shit.
Yeah.
Which guy?
Hat.
Oh. How do you know him?
He goes to Doc Holidays and drinks.
Oh shit! I don't think I know the guy. You should introduce me to him. I'd like to interview him.
Oh yeah. Oh well. He's an easygoing guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's been doing it for a while. So he gets all the bands. He calls them up and.
Well, you're saying he booked the Velvet Underground at Cafe Wa?
No, I mean he works there now.
He works there now.
He's the one that books all the bands now.
Oh, okay. Still interesting.
But I think that's the only job he ever had. But I don't think he's probably like 35, 37 now.
Okay. But I mean, the Cafe Wa is historic,
Yeah, so he's been working there, and they're opening a new place, and he's working on that too. But he's the one that get all the new bands. Like when it's a band, he'll call them up. You guys, what dates you want, this and that. So you should talk to him. He's a good guy.
He hangs at Doc's?
Yeah.
I wonder if I know him. I don't know. But anyway, basically Warhol began, managing the Velvet Underground, and he proposed to them that they take on a chanteuse, meaning a female singer, beautiful female singer, to sing a couple of songs. And they agreed to it. I think at first they were a little, unsure about it, but they did agree to it. Now, the group became the centerpiece of Andy Warhol's what was called the Exploding Plastic Inevitable. It was a multimedia performance featuring music, background lighting, films shown in the background, okay, and people dancing. There was a famous whip dance that Mary Warrenov would do, where she would, dance with a whip and whip.
Oh, yeah.
All that stuff. Okay. Very kind of dark for the 60s. Okay. I mean, the Velvet Underground got their name from a book about S&M. Here's my cat. And
is that Cash?
That's Cash. Yes, the famous Cash. She loves to look out the window right here behind me.
Oh yeah.
So, Nico would sing lead vocals on 3 songs that would make the debut album: a song called Femme Fatale, a song called All Tomorrow's Parties, and a third one called I'll Be Your Mirror. She also did backing vocals on the opening track Sunday Morning, which is one of the most beautiful songs I think ever written. Reviewer Richard Goldstein would describe Nico as one half goddess, one half icicle. I think that's man. And he also would say that the Velvet Underground vocal sounds, the songs that she sang, sounds something like a cello getting up in the morning. I like that.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
I don't know either, but it definitely describes her vocals.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
So Nico's tenure with the Velvet Underground was there was a lot of personal and musical difficulties. She wasn't easy to get along with, and neither were some of the guys in the band. Okay. Yeah. Multi-instrumentalist band member John Cale wrote that Nico's long dressing room preparations and pre-performance ritual of burning a candle often held up performances, which especially irritated Lou Reed. That pissed him off. Okay. Nico was also partially deaf. Okay. Which a lot of people didn't know that. Might have had something to do with her voice the way it was. It sometimes caused her to veer off key when she was singing. And she was often ridiculed by band members for that. The album became a classic, of course, the first Velvet Underground. It ranked 13th on Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time, though at the time it sold nothing. Okay, it bombed.
But that's pretty impressive. 13,
Well,
ranked 13.
Yeah, I mean, people often say that nobody bought that record, but whoever did started the band, and that's pretty much true. You know, I've met people that saw the Velvet Underground in that time, and were blown away by them because of that whole Warhol show that would be in the background. Okay, and nobody really knew what to make of them at the time. They're very dark for the '60s. Also very New York, which doesn't really sell throughout the country. There's some very interesting performances that were recorded by the Velvet Underground later on, where they would be in Texas and San Francisco and places like that, and nobody knew what the fuck to make of them, you know. But when they had Nico in the band, it was definitely she put up a striking appearance, that's for sure. Now, immediately following her musical work with the Velvet Underground, which would be pretty much after its the debut would be released in '67, she would move on. Okay, she began working as a solo artist. Now, she performed regularly at the Dom in New York City.
Okay.
You know what the Dom was?
No, not really.
Okay, on St. Mark's Place between 2nd and 3rd on the north side of the street. Okay, in the middle, that big white building. Okay, multi-store. I think it's about 6 stories. The Dom was a club located in there. Jimi Hendrix used to play there.
Wow.
Eric Clapton and Warhol would put his shows on there. Okay, obviously the Velvet Underground played there too. At these solo shows, she was accompanied by a revolving cast of guitarists, sometimes including members of the Velvet Underground who would help her out. Also, people you might have heard of, like Tim Hardin, Tim Buckley, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, and Jackson Browne. A very young Jackson Browne was involved.
That's pretty impressive. That's pretty good guitarist, I gotta tell you.
He would actually have an affair with Nico.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she was quite a bit older than him. And I think he was a teenager at the time. I think he was about 18 when he met her. So he was a good 10 years younger than her. And they had an affair, I believe. I remember reading about that. For her debut album, 1967's Chelsea Girl, she did record songs by Bob Dylan, like I'll Keep It With Mine. But she recorded Tim Hardin songs, Jackson Browne penned songs, and others, okay? Velvet Underground members Lou Reed, John Cale, and Sterling Morrison contributed to this album, with Nico, Reed, and Cale co-writing one song called It Was a Pleasure Then. Chelsea Girl is a traditional chamber folk album, okay, that's what you would call it, with strings and flute arrangements, and it was produced by Tom Wilson, who did produce the Velvet Underground's album, okay, the first album. Nico had little to say in its production and was kind of disappointed with the result. She didn't like it. She said in 1981, "I still cannot listen to it because everything I wanted for that record, they took it away. I asked for drums, they said no. I asked for more guitar, they said no. And I asked for simplicity, and they put in flutes. They added strings and I didn't like them, but I could live with them." But for the first time that she heard the album, she said, "I cried, and it was all because of the flute." In California, Nico would spend some time with Jim Morrison of The Doors, who encouraged her to write her own songs. I have to disagree with Nico. I think it's a beautiful record. I think she wanted to rock out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay? And I don't know if it was maybe the limitations in her vocals that they didn't let her do that. They put this big production with string arrangements and stuff like that. But I think it's a great, just very seminal record that everybody should listen to once and check it out. Kind of like Trout Mask Replica or any of the other crazy, Frank Zappa stuff and things that you should check out. But in 1968, she would release a an epic album. It's probably between Chelsea Girls and this one, I'd say it's her best work. This was called the Marble Index. She actually wrote the lyrics and the music. She started playing something called a harmonium, okay, which is a keyboard type instrument. Usually they were used for like a funeral dirge or something like that. Right. I mean, that was a little bit later on. She is definitely, I'm going to just throw this out there. I think she's like a godmother of Gothic music. Okay. Goth music that became a thing in the 80s. Bands like Bauhaus and Sisters of Mercy. We've covered those bands in the past. Definitely had to take take a nod from her. You know what I mean? So she started playing this harmonium, and John Cale from the Velvet Underground would add an array of folk and classical instruments and had done the arrangements on the album. The harmonium would become her signature instrument for the rest of her career. The album has a classic European folk sound mixed in with kind of like, because of the harmonium, almost like like something you'd hear at a funeral, like keyboards and things like that. It was a radical, the album marked a radical change in Nico's appearance as well. She once again would dye her hair, get rid of that blonde hair, and this time go from blonde to red. And she began dressing mostly in black. And it was a look that was, like I just mentioned, kind of an early version of Gothic rock. Okay. If you look at that album cover, I don't know if you can find the Marble Index anywhere. It's a very striking. It's in black and white, so you don't really see the red of her hair. Okay. You see it looks almost black, her hair, and she's in black. Okay. So it's very striking album cover. Now she would she would make a promotional film for a song called Evening of Light, which was filmed by Francois de Menil. This video is in color, and it shows her with that new red hair and black clothes and everything like that. There's also a scene with a very young Iggy Pop in this movie. Okay, 68 or 69, just when the Stooges were getting started. I believe he's another one she had an affair with as well. She's quite an affair kind of person.
He was banging.
I mentioned Jim Morrison earlier, that she hung out with him. She loved Jim Morrison. Okay, she loved the Doors. It was like her favorite band practically. There's a scene in the Doors movie, the Oliver Stone one, where Val Kilmer's playing Jim Morrison. Remember that movie?
Yeah.
There's a scene when he's hanging out with Andy Warhol's crowd and Andy Warhol. I forget who's Andy Warhol in that movie played by. Is it Crispin Glover? Something like that. I don't remember. But there's a scene when Jim is waiting for an elevator, and I think it's at the factory in Union Square where Warhol had his crowd and his parties and all that. And he's waiting for an elevator, and the elevator door opens up, and Nico's in there. And they get it on in the elevator. So it's, well, I don't know if that really happened, but they did get it on. They definitely did.
Oh, they probably did, yeah.
Yeah. Now, by the early 70s, she would return to live performances. She got away from it for a little while by when she recorded those two albums. Nico would play the harmonium. She gave concerts in Amsterdam as well as London, where she and John Cale opened up for a very early Pink Floyd. 1972 saw a one-off live reunion of Nico, Cale, and Lou Reed at the Bataclan in Paris. There is a recording of that, I believe, released. There might be some video of it as well, I believe, out there. She would release two more solo albums in the 1970s, an album in 1970 called Desert Shore, and then one called The End that came out in 1974. That actually features the Doors song, The End, the classic. She wrote the music, sang, and played the harmonium. Cale would produce her and played on some of the instruments on both those albums. On The End, it featured Brian Eno from Roxy Music on synthesizer, Phil Manzanera on guitar. He was also a member of Roxy Music. She would appear at the Rainbow Theatre in London with Cale, Brian Eno, Kevin Ayers. The album was called June 1st, 1974, and it was a live performance of that show. In that, she would perform The End by the Doors at that live show. Between 1970 and 1979, Nico made about 7 films with French director Philippe Garrel. She met Garrel in 1969 and contributed the song called The Falconer to his film L'Élite de la Verge. Soon after, she was living with Garrel and became a central figure in his cinematic and personal circles. Nico's first acting appearance with Garrel occurred in his 1972 film La Cicatrice Intérieure. Nico also supplied the music for this film, and would collaborate closely on the production of it. She also appeared in the Garrel films Anathor in 1972. There was a silent Jean Seberg film called Les Hautes Solitudes, released in 1974. She was in Un Ange Passé in 1975, Le Berceau de Cristal in 1976, starring Pierre Clementi. Nico and the famous Anita Pallenberg was in that movie. Voyage au Jardin des Morts in 1978, and also his 1991 film called Je t'aime pour la guitare is dedicated to Nico, 1991.
So she was busy, man.
Yep, she was very busy. Now, in December of 1974, Nico opened for Tangerine Dream's infamous concert at the Reims Cathedral in Reims, France. Around this time, and her music was perfect for a cathedral, definitely.
Oh yeah,
the sound of it, like I said, her playing the harmonium in a cathedral, the acoustics in something like that. Around this time, Nico became involved with the Berliner musician Lutz Ulbrich. He was a guitarist for Ash Ra Temple. That was the name of the band. Ulbrich would accompany Nico on guitar at many of her concerts through the rest of that decade. Also in this period, Nico let her hair return to its natural brown color, dark brown, but continued wearing mostly black. And that would be her public image for the rest of her life. She and Island Records, where she was signed to, would have many disputes at this time. She didn't get along with the record label too good. And in 1975, the label dropped her from their roster, which was a problem.
But they were changing stuff for her and adding fruits and stuff. So she was already pissed with the label anyway,
Yeah, and it wasn't like she was selling a lot of records. I'm sure that was an issue.
But she took out like 7 albums, I think, and she had a bunch of singles and stuff.
And they're all like, very classic seminal albums that are important towards influencing people and things like that, originality. So in September of 78, Nico performed at the Kenne Rock 78 Festival in Spain. Also performing at this event was Blondie, Kevin Ayers, and the band Ultravox. She made a vocal contribution to Neuronium's second album, Vuelo Químico, as she was at the studio by chance having to be there, and was recorded in Barcelona in 1978 by Michael Huygen, Carlos Guerrero, and Albert Jimenez. She read excerpts from Eulalume by Edgar Allan Poe, which was a famous poem by Poe.
Yeah.
Said that the music deeply moved her, so she could not help but make a contribution. During the same year, Nico briefly toured as a supporting act for Susie and the Banshees, one of the many post-punk bands who name-checked her as an influence. In Paris, Patti Smith bought a new harmonium for Nico after she had hers stolen. one time.
Wow.
Nico returned to New York in 1979, where her comeback concert at CBGB's, accompanied by John Cale and Lutz Ulbrich, was reviewed positively by the New York Times. She began playing regularly at the Squat Theater and other venues, with Jim Tisdale accompanying her on harp and Gittler guitar. They played together on a sold-out tour of 12 cities in the East and Midwest. At some shows, she was accompanied on guitar by Cheetah Chrome from the Dead Boys.
Damn.
Yeah. So she was kind of falling in with the punk scene a little bit at that time.
Yeah, but she was also always in good company, because you got names like from Brian Jones to fucking Bob Dylan. She kept good company.
Right. Now, in France, Nico was introduced to photographer Antoine Giacomoni. Giacomoni's photos of Nico would be used for her next album and would eventually be featured in a book called Nico Photographies, Horizon et Limites, Paris, 2002. Through Antoine Giacomoni, she met Corsican bassist Philip Quilicini. Nico recorded her next studio album called Drama of Exile in 1981, produced by Philip Quilicini. Muhammad Hadi, also known as Mad Sher Khan, played Oriental rock guitar and wrote all the Oriental productions. Very interesting sound on that album. It was a departure from her earlier work. It was kind of like a mix of rock and Middle Eastern music arrangements. For this album, in addition to originals like Genghis Khan and 6040, Nico recorded covers of the Velvet Underground's I'm Waiting for the Man and David Bowie's Heroes. That's something everybody should hear, her singing Heroes. Drama of Exile was released twice, actually, in two different versions. The second appearing in 1983 with a little different track list. After relocating to Manchester, England in the early 80s, Nico acquired a manager, the influential Factory Records executive and promoter Alan Wise, and began working with a variety of backing bands for her many live performances. These bands chronologically included Blue Orchids, the Bedlamites, and a band called The Faction. In 1981, Nico released the Philippe Quilicini produced single Saeta with the track Vegas on the back on Flick Knife Records. The following year saw another single called Procession, produced by Martin Hannett and featuring the Invisible Girls. Included on the Procession single was a new version of her famously sung song by the Velvet Underground, All Tomorrow's Parties. Nico toured in 82 with post-punk band Blue Orchids as her backing band. At the same time, her work impacted the emerging Gothic rock scene, like I mentioned before. At Salford University in 1982, she joined Bauhaus for a performance of I'm Waiting for the Man. That same year, Nico's supporting acts included the Sisters of Mercy and Gene Loves Jezebel. In September of 1982, Nico performed at the D-Side Leisure for the Futurama Festival. The lineup for this show also included The Damned, Dead or Alive, the Southern Death Cult, which would be the Cult, right? Remember them? Dance Society, and a band called The Membranes. After the end of her work for the Blue Orchids, she hired musical arranger James Young and his band The Faction for her concerts. The live compilations 1982 Tour Diary and Persona in Europe were released in November 1982 on the One Half Records cassette label in France. Also, the Roar, Reach Out International Record cassette label, reissued the former under the revised title Do or Die in 1983. That was the 1982 Tour Diary album. These releases were followed by more live performances throughout Europe for the next few years. So she's getting a lot of notoriety.
She's riding a freaking train.
Exactly. A lot of and not so much in America, really in Europe. She recorded her final solo album called Camera Obscura in 1985 with The Faction, produced by John Cale once again. It featured Nico's version of the Richard Rodgers Lorenz Hart song My Funny Valentine. The album's closing song was an updated version of Koenig, which she had previously recorded for La Cicatrice Interior. It was the only song on the album to feature only Nico's voice and a harmonium. A music video for My Heart Is Empty was filmed at the Fridge in Brixton. The next few years saw frequent live performances by Nico with tours of Europe, Japan, and Australia, usually with the Faction or the Bedlamites backing her up. A number of Nico's performances towards the end of her life were recorded and released, including 1982's Heroin, Nico in Tokyo. Heroine, I should say, not heroin. We'll talk about the heroin. And Behind the Iron Curtain was another record. In March of 1988, she and James Young from the Faction, hired new guitarist Henry Olsen. Together, they composed new songs to be premiered at a festival organized by Lutz Ulbrich at the Berlin Planetarium in June. Nico was then inspired by Egyptian music and Egyptian singer and diva Kalthum. Young stated that the new material was good enough to be a springboard to a new record with an Egyptian orchestra. Okay. The Berlin concert ended with a song from the end called You Forget to Answer. A duet called Your Kisses Burn with singer Mark Allman was her last studio recording. It was about a month before her death in 1988.
Wow.
It was released a few months after her death on Allman's album called The Stars We Are. The recording of the 1988 Berlin concert was later released with the title Nico's Last Concert, Fata Morgana. So she would pass away. I'll get into that. We're going to talk a little bit about her personal life here, because really her personal life is intertwined so much with her professional career. Like I said, she had many affairs, many interests in all different kinds of music that would influence her career. On 11th of August, 1962, she gave birth to her son, Christian Aran Ballone, who she called Ari. She was living with Nico's Papatakis in 1962, but told him that Alain Delon would be the father of her child. Delon was a famous French actor, very popular at the time. Okay. Delon always denied this, that it was his child forever. Okay. And it has never actually been proven that it was.
Wow. No DNA test.
No. And he just refused to acknowledge the child. She was unable to raise that child due to a variety of things. Okay. Drugs and also just constant touring. And I think she just wasn't capable. Some people just can't be parents,
Yeah.
So, yeah. Now, interestingly enough, even though Alain Delon didn't acknowledge the kid, his parents raised that child.
Wow.
Okay. And he would go on to become a photographer and an actor of his own. Okay, Ari. He died last year at the age of 60 in Paris.
Wow.
His whole life was kind of sad. He had this mom that died in 88. He was still in his 20s when she passed away. I've read books that, I don't know. I remember reading that they did drugs together. I don't know. Okay.
Wow.
I'm not going to say that happened. There was just stories of it. Nico saw herself kind of as a part of a tradition of bohemian artists, which she traced back to the Romanticism of the early 19th century. She led a very nomadic life. She never lived anywhere for too long. She lived in obviously different countries, apart from Germany, where she grew up, and Spain, where she would pass away. Nico lived in Italy and France in the 1950s, spent most of the 60s in the U.S., in New York, in California, and lived in London for a while in the early 60s and again in the early 80s when she moved to London and Manchester. She had a 3-month affair with Brian Jones during that time when he met her.
Wow.
And she did actually become pregnant, but would terminate the pregnancy. by
He
Brian.
did some banging, man.
Yeah, Brian Jones had enough illegitimate kids of his own. He was probably happy. So this event prompted her to seek out a closer relationship with her son Ari after she got that abortion. The final years of her life were mainly spent in the Prestwich and Salford area of Greater Manchester. Although she was still struggling with heroin addiction, she became interested in music again. For a few months in the 1980s, she shared an apartment in Brixton, London, okay, with punk poet John Cooper Clarke, but they were not romantic. They just lived together a little bit. Nico was a heroin addict for over 15 years. In the book Songs They Never Play on the Radio, James Young from The Faction, a member of her band, recalls many examples of her troubling behavior due to her overwhelming addiction, and that Nico claimed never to have taken the drug while in the Velvets, but only began using during her relationship with Philippe Garel in the 1970s.
Wow.
I kind of believe that. I think there's a bit of a folklore with the Velvet Underground. They were all junkies at the time of that first album, and
I would do a lot of drugs.
I've heard stories that wasn't really true. That was a little bit later on. I'm sure they were doing things.
Yeah.
But I also read that when Lou had written Heroin for the first album, he had never even done it.
Wow.
So he wasn't writing from experience, though the mythology of the Velvet Underground is that they were all junkies. But, obviously, from what she's saying here, she hadn't done it, at least. Now, in his autobiography, Cheetah Chrome depicted his friendship with the strung-out Nico in the 1980s and how they kind of lived off each other a little bit while they were struggling. I read that in his book. It's an interesting part of his book. Shortly before her death in 1988, Nico stopped using heroin and was on a methadone program trying to clean up.
That's even worse, man.
Well, it's a way to get off it, but unfortunately, you can get hooked on that too.
Yeah.
Okay. But she did get into healthy eating and bicycle riding, which would actually be how she died. I'll get into that shortly. Nico's friend Danny Fields, helped her get signed to Elektra Records, described her as a Nazi-esque person, saying every once in a while there'd be something about Jews that she would say, but Nico, he would say to her, Nico, I'm Jewish. And she was like, yeah, but I don't mean you. Danny's a classic. He's a funny guy. I've talked to him at different shows over the years. He's a funny guy. Of course, he got her signed to Elektra. He got the Stooges signed to Elektra. He got the MC5 signed to Elektra. He would manage the Ramones through the 70s. Danny was in the middle of everything, and he was Jewish, so whatever she was saying was definitely offensive, Nico, according to Danny Fields, in the early 1970s, Nico attacked a mixed-race woman at the Chelsea Hotel with a smashed wine glass, sticking it in her eye, saying, I hate black people. That's messed up, right? Island Records would drop Nico after she told an interviewer that she did not like Negroes and that they had features like animals. Nico said she had been raped at the age of 13 by a black American soldier. Okay, that goes back to that story. Okay, though, like I said, there's no record of this. Supposedly she told the story that she was raped by a black soldier and he was court-martialed, but there was no surviving record of it. Who knows? According to Witz, who was her biographer, Nico had a misogynistic tendencies towards women, describing them as poison. So she almost had like a male chauvinistic kind of attitude towards women.
Wow.
Interesting. In 2019, Nigel Bagleys, who was Nico's co-manager and promoter in Manchester, claimed he never saw Nico express racist views, stating she was in a multicultural city and was good friends with Yankee Bill, our American Jamaican doorman. Her drummer Graham Dowdle said she played an Indian instrument worked with North Africans, and brought that to her music. She was certainly capable of very casual racism about Alan Wise, who was Jewish, but that was a way of having a go at him. He's saying she was breaking his balls, that she really wasn't racist or anything like that. But who knows? You know, it was different. Now, sadly, when she was on a vacation on the Spanish island of Ibiza on July 17th, 1988, Nico went out for a bicycle ride, something she was very interested in, and she fell off the bike and hit her head when she fell. Okay. A passing taxi driver on the road found her unconscious, but had difficulty getting her admitted to local hospitals. She was misdiagnosed as suffering from heat exposure and was declared dead at 20 hours, which would be what, 10 o'clock at night? I think 8 o'clock at night. 8 o'clock at night. X-rays later revealed that she had a severe cerebral hemorrhage. That was what her hitting her head. I mean, Ibiza is a very hot place. So when they took her in, they thought she just passed out from the heat and fell off a bike. They didn't see the cerebral hemorrhage. Ari would later say that her mother told him that when they were on holiday together that she needed to go downtown to buy some marijuana. She sat down in front of the mirror and wrapped a black scarf around her head. My mother stared at the mirror and took great care to wrap the scarf appropriately. Down the hill on her bike, she said, "I'll be back soon." She left in the early afternoon on the hottest day of the year. That's how that went down. So that might have contributed to why they thought it was heat exhaustion or something.
Yeah.
So she would be cremated, and her remains are buried in her mother's plot in Grunwald, which is a forest cemetery right outside Berlin. Friends played a tape of Mutterlein, a song from the Desert Shore album, at her funeral. So, you know, that's Nico. Okay. It's an incredible career.
Yeah.
Very influential, just like the Velvet Underground was, that she was involved.
Yeah. It was definitely quite a career, and she was busy all the time. It doesn't seem like she had enough time for herself, because she was always either doing movies,
right,
making albums, or getting banged.
And making movies, right? And you know, she was you know, a true bohemian spirit, I guess you could say, by every definition of the word, right?
Yeah, she was almost like a gypsy, because she moved around so much.
Yeah, exactly, like a gypsy. And but she became very close with her son in time.
Yeah.
And sadly, he would, you know, grow up around addiction and have addiction himself. And there's a movie that everybody should see. Came out late 90s, I believe, maybe 98, 99, called Nico Icon. Okay. And all the people I mentioned that were still alive were interviewed, including her son, about her. There's some great footage. There's some great interviews with Nico in the documentary. I think it's a beautiful film. I remember seeing it at the Bleecker Street Cinemas, which doesn't exist there anymore. And you know, check it out. I mean, Chelsea Girls and the Marble Index are pretty much like two records that I think complete any good record collection.
I'm going to see if I see the documentary. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's out there. I've seen it a few times over the years. I know it's streaming. I forget where. Maybe, you know what? I think it's on YouTube for free. I think.
Oh, all right.
I think so, if I remember right. Check by this time, because it's already like 28 years old or something like that, or 25 years old. So that's what we got. Nico. Okay. Next show we're gonna do is about the Tubes.
All right.
The famous sort of punk, theatrical, crazy ass band from the 70s that had a big hit in the 80s called She's a Beauty. But they had already been past their prime by that point. But still like an interesting band that we're going to talk about soon. So where can we find you, Rob, on the internet? What's your handle?
Find me on Getting Lumped Up, anything Getting Lumped Up, and you'll see my big head pop out, and I'll be there. You can also find me on Instagram Facebook and YouTube. Remember, if you're watching the show, like and subscribe. The more subscriber we get and like we get, the better we can make some money and maybe do better shows for research and stuff.
Yes, exactly. The more the merrier. So if you like what you see, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And we got a lot of things coming up. We're coming up soon. Some changes, and it's all going to be for the good, for the better.
Yeah, for the better. And
about
Mike,
that.
where can we find you?
I'm all over the place. You could find me on Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter, as Rocker Mike 212. You could also find me on other social media like Getter, Truth Social, Cloud Hub, MeWe as Rocker Mike. And I'm most active on Facebook under the name Rocko Mike. Mike, because they won't let me be Rocker Mike. I've said that a million times.
Yeah.
And of course, we have the Rockshow podcast group page featuring me and you on Facebook. Join that, hit like, subscribe to the group. We have music, news, interesting articles I find. Very active on there several times a day. Join the group. Feel free to post your favorite rock and roll music. Doesn't matter what era, what year, doesn't matter. It's all one thing. We talk about everything going from, Mississippi Delta blues to what's going on today.
Yeah, you also post the song of the day every day also.
Always a song of the day, and usually a lumped up song of the night if I'm not too lumped up to put it up. If you don't see a lumped up song of the night, I'm either like super busy or just too lumped up to put it up. But I always get a song of the day in almost every day.
So remember, people, don't get drunk.
Get lumped up.
See you next time.
I wanna get lumped up tonight. Listen to Rob Rossi and Rocker Mike on the only podcast that I'll hear. That won't make me wanna rip off my ears. Oh, the Rock Show, 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 the Rock Show. Oh, I want the Rock Show.